Our commander-in-chief making a dramatic last-minute call before an attack on Iran after it struck down one of our drones. Here's the president explaining his decision.
Came back, said, sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead. Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
Joining us now is Zuhdi Jasser, American Islamic Forum for Democracy president. So Zuhdi, what are the consequences of the decision to reverse the strike?
Well, I think ultimately it was a wise decision. We don't want to hurry into this. I think the world, and especially Iran, needs to see that we mean business. So the brinksmanship that we had, I think, ultimately told them we did mean business and said, you know what? We're going to wait a second because it was an unmanned drone, but this won't happen again. I don't think the president can use this technique again, in that ultimately we are bringing more troops into the region. We're telling them that hopefully we're going to be escorting ships and not allowing them to attack our economic lines and also our troops in the region.
Zuhdi, it's Gary Smith. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Here's my question. Do you think how Trump, what is, in the view of the rest of the world's leaders, how Trump is handling this situation so far?
I think they are comparing and contrasting it to the previous administration, where we handed them the deal of the century to basically change their nuclear capabilities within a few months. And now we're seeing that we're allowing the Department of Defense to defend our interests. We're not letting them continue to be acting with abandon and supporting the Yemeni rebels, the Houthi terrorists, the terrorism in Syria, and also the action against the tankers. So I think ultimately they're going to have to pay a price for wanton acts, but they're desperate, and we can't allow their desperation to bring us to war. So I think they're seeing a prudent President Trump. But on the one hand, the journalists that are against the Trump administration can't say, well, we ignore the Iranian attacks on tankers, the Houthi arming, the Assad arming, and it's all Bolton who wants to rush to war. That doesn't make sense.
I'm a little concerned on the economic front here. First of all, our economy is a little weak in the bond market, and you don't want oil prices rising not for good reasons, which is a strong economy. If they're going up because everyone's, consuming more oil, that's great. But if there's this kind of situation, it could accelerate economic decline. But more specific to this country, are we running out of economic levers to do with Iran because of all the sanctions, all the back? Like in the old days, if we had their cash, I guess we could have deducted the $130 million for this drone they shot down. But now, what do we do to punish them besides military action? Does that actually put us in kind of a weak position where we have no choice because we're not doing enough business with this country?
Well, I think the Department of Treasury is doing everything they can. As we saw with Secretary Mnuchin just last night, he put in more sanctions and also laundering mechanisms that they've been using have been beginning to be plugged more and more. But I also think it's important to note they are desperate. They're on the verge of economic collapse. So we have to shore up our allies, the Saudis and others that we rely on for their oil, and others to believe that their passage of oil is going to be safe. And ultimately, Iran over time will not continue in this path. They will ultimately fail and the revolution will grow, or they will continue in acts of desperation.
Zuhdi, the way I see it, there are two options. The Iranian regime can come to the president and say, look, we will stop developing nuclear weapons and make a deal that way. And I think he would consider, removing some of the sanctions and easing some of the economic pain that they're having. Or they can fight the fight the way they are and draw out some sort of a military conflict. Why is it, and my sense is that because of the culture and the religious underpinnings here, that it's just so difficult for them to negotiate?
This is, again, they have a combination of the, my parents are from Syria, and the Assad regime, and whether it's Saddam Hussein or any of these militant dictators, they believe they are the country. You combine that in Iran with a theocracy that has an eschatologic end-of-time scenario, they become national suicidal regimes, which is why they can never have a nuclear weapon, because they see themselves ushering in the end of times with the 12th Imam. So there's no reason for them to negotiate unless they absolutely have to, and their survival depends on it, which is why the Trump administration's policy has been the only wise one, and why the previous administration led to so much conflict and terrorism in the entire region.
Zuhdi, you know, there's some breaking news that we just reported that we are evacuating contractors from our bases in Iraq, hundreds of contractors, Lockheed Martin and others. Short of a direct attack on the United States, Iran has ways of influencing or trying to influence our behavior. This may be one, setting up attacks in Iraq over which they have a lot of influence, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what happened a month ago when we started this deployment of troops to protect our interests. They were threatening our troops, the few that remained in Syria. They were threatening our troops in Iraq, and now the contractors are being threatened. So ultimately, the Shia crescent of Iran through Iraq into Syria and Hezbollah and Lebanon is where they will shore up their power. And we need to give them a loud and unmistakable response that we are present there, and we will not allow them to continue unabandoned acts of terror in the region.
Everyone seems to feel like the president has been wise on this. I don't pretend that this is an easy situation, and I agree that calling off this strike sounds wise to me. But I'm appalled by the communication and the handling of this. The president says, I thought about it for a minute, and I realized 150 lives, 10 minutes before we called. You didn't think about the 150 lives more than 10 minutes before? And he says, oh, they said, sir. He never misses an opportunity to tell you. Everybody's calling him sir. Don't miss an opportunity for self-aggrandizement while you're talking about 150 lives at stake. I'm appalled by the communication of it.
Well, I think, listen, you can debate how it was articulated, but at the end of the day...
On Twitter, that's how it was articulated.
Well, I'm sorry. The bottom line is he showed restraint, and the bottom line is Iran and the entire world thought he was going to respond. So there was an impact felt there, and the fact that he said that he was going to, not harm any lives, etc., and thought about it more. Bottom line is I want to believe that he's my commander-in-chief. I don't think he can do the same technique again. In the end, this is something you can only say once, because in the future it'll appear like he's simply, as some have said, a Twitter tiger rather than a commander-in-chief that should be taken seriously, and I think he will in the future be taken seriously.
Zuhdi, I got to let you go, but before I do, a quick answer. It's got to be very quick. What's more likely, that the Iranians will come to the negotiating table or that we will end up in some kind of military conflict?
I think neither. I think the Iranian regime will fall over the next 6 months. That's the only solution to this.
All right. Well, we have to sit and watch and wait. Zuhdi, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming in. Meanwhile, oil